Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Chronicle. So, this movie is kind of really interesting because we have this, superhero finding footage uh, approach to a superhero film. Plus, it's also this kind of prank superhero film where these guys are to have these abilities. So they're just like, well, hey, what should we do with this? Well, let's F with people. It's kind of like Hollow Man, where we have Kevin Bacon just going and why don't I just use my power? Why don't I just mess with people? Why don't I just go on and go over to my neighbors and say a little bit more than hello, if you know what I mean? For this one, people could have wildly different opinions about this movie, and I could understand that. Some people could honestly like the approach of this film because it has this kind of real world kind of approach to it, and it feels that some people may like this movie compared to others just because it feels real, it feels like this could actually happen. The only naysay that I would probably go out of my way to talk about this movie is that it seems that the Power Rangers reboot movie is to try and feel like this film, is to try to go this kind of approach. And immediately once we see that film, I could see this a lot in it, with the exclusion of the whole finding footage kind of thing. But it just has that kind of feel that these people are going to test their superpowers, and so also, yeah, the Power Rangers have much more of these super strength things and all kinds of skills and whatever that they're going to use. And so it feels like these movies kind of counterbalance one another. But I can just say this movie is because you could probably find one of these guys that is to be you. Maybe you can be this Andrew guy who is kind of going through some rough times because his mother is to be sick, or his father is hard to live with or deal with, or whatever. You can be like Matt, who's just kind of this casually fun guy who stumbles upon finding a woman in this film. You could also be just like Steve, a guy that seems to be working his butt off to throw his hat into the ring of being, I guess, class president. And also, it seems that each one of these characters are starting to more and more, as they realize that they have these powers, they're starting to realize, well, what should we do with these powers? What what more good could we bring to the world if we just kind of do these things? What can we could we actually do and have these powers to become possibly popular, to be getting our 15 minutes of fame instead of just be recording it all through this camera, which Alexander is to become a skill at going on and just kind of having this camera kind of floating around in the presence, kind of making it to be that we finally don't have to have Andrew kind of talking through the camera. Andrew can kind of put the camera with his power just got kind of off at some point, and so then Andrew can actually be in frame because he's using his power or ability to go on and be able to have us it's really just some crane, or it's really just some whatever approach to this. But it would be interesting to see how much of this film actually was really legitimately shot, and what stuff was just CGI. Of course, I'm sure the flying, there's parts and bits of it where you can immediately just say, okay, those are probably strings there that they took out. And no, really? Yeah. Uh, but then once we get to certain areas and certain whatever, it's like, okay, like, so there must have been some kind of CGI'd thing that they approached with here. But it would be kind of interesting to see the like the budget possibly of this film, and to probably compare it to other films to just see like, okay, this had this kind of budget as the same as XYZ movie. Just like, okay, so these people really saved a lot of money, or they probably had to do and put in a lot of money for this kind of film. Like, it makes you want to question, like, is this a good quality film? Because the way of which that it's just kind of this like found footage kind of thing. But like, look at Blair Witch, like that movie just skyrocketed off the year that it came out, and then all of a sudden we just turn around and finally just have them reveal, oh yeah, like, hey, like, they just appear at some award show somewhere and they're like, hey, yeah, we're still alive, this was all just a ruse or a fake thing to just try and sell tickets, because they were like based on a true story, this found footage, and like they really try to push that this is a real thing, the Blair Witch thing. And but like, for this movie, it's wildly different because it's superpowers. Like, you can't exactly just, oh yeah, this is based on a true story. Yeah, superpowers. Why didn't, like, we have cases, of course, of like, even they say it in the movie where there's like cases of telekinesis where you can do any number of things, even at some point vibrate. To where the guys are like, how could you use vibrating to just kind of benefit us? So, so yeah, so going in this movie, let's go into spoilers. Let's crack it out of the park. Let's go into this film. Let's go into that double five time territory, because it's about that time yet again to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time we get to spoil this movie. So, very beginning of the film, we are to, of course, have Andrew get this camera, and in the early stages, we have Andrew having his father at 7 in the morning, I guess, being drunk, smacking on to Andrew's door, just pop, 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 like, Andrew, open this door so that we can slap you up some kind of way or whatever. We have Andrew's father, Richard, who is to just, like, man, what a piece of work. Michael Kelly, magnificent. Because, like, and here's the thing, like, a lot of people are like, oh my god, like, why are you saying that this guy is really good at what he does? Like, this is a horrible thing. I say that everything is to be imaginary, and like, everything is to be a person's performance. And so you have to take Andrew's performance, and you also have to take Richard's performance, and how Richard's performance escalates Andrew to become a much darker and darker character. And that's the thing that I enjoy about this film probably the most, is just, we have this this driving force to have Andrew, who is going to finally just use these powers for evil because he just doesn't care anymore. It seems that at like first shot, like, it seemed like there were some good intentions technically, and I'll break that down. In this film, like, he was trying to do something right, but then all of a sudden it just like spins off into, yeah, evilish person. So let's go into it. Let's go into that part of the film because I've already spoiled it, or I've already set up that it's a spoiler. So Andrew, of course, is to have his camera on him at all times, and so all of a sudden Matt is to be like, seriously, like you're recording me all the time, and Andrew's like, yeah, like this is just what I'm doing now, and so at some points, like Richard is to ask like where Andrew is getting like the money for this camera. I'm also thinking, I'm like, yeah, where is he getting the money for this camera? Because it doesn't seem like he has a job. Like, is he like, is he selling, is he selling blood somewhere and we don't see that part? Like, is he stealing from someone somewhere? Like, is Matt giving him money to afford this stuff? I question. So, in the early stages of this film, we have Matt, who, of course, to be like happy-go-lucky, ka-ching, ka-ching, but the price tag. He's going on and singing this song at the top of his lungs, and he's actually pretty dang good at it, because more than likely he's like, yeah, I freaking practice out of this song to make sure I'm getting all the words right. I'm like, yeah. And so, like, and so, Matt, if you went on to do any number of musical things, maybe there's a whole reason for that. So, Alex Russell, I guess. So, Andrew is to go on to school, and so immediately Andrew is to be given some kind of paper to vote for Steve, and Andrew's like, sure, yeah, whatever. Yeah, I'll just go ahead and vote for Steve. Whatever you say. Andrew goes and eats his lunch, I guess, by this uh, like football field where I guess some cheerleaders are practicing and so on and so forth. I'm like, how is it you have a school where you can kind of just eat your lunch wherever? Like, I know for me, like, if you even went like at a certain part of like being outside, even your school, like a lot of people are like, hey man, like bring it in. Like, why are you so far out here? And it's like, well, lunch. Like, it feels like you're like in a weird, goofish like prison at some points when you're even at just school, where it's you can't like if you're technically in lunch, if you're technically at lunch, which should just be you just doing whatever you want until that time is up. It's still just like, oh no, like you may not hear the bell to go back to school. Like, come on. So, uh, so Andrew is supposed to be filming himself, and all of a sudden the cheerleader is to come to Andrew and like, hey, like, could you stop filming us? It's kind of weird. And Andrew is like, well, hey, I'm not really filming you. Like, I'm filming myself, and you just happen to be there. So, so Andrew is continuing to go and film himself, and so we push on in this movie to the more kind of nitty gritty important parts. And so we have Richard going and seeing that Andrew's door is open. And so he slaps him and tells him, like, if I ever tell you to open your door, you open your door. I would just be like, I'm sorry, if I'm going to get freaking hit, like, why wouldn't I avoid opening, or why would I avoid, like, not opening my door to you? Like, yeah, I would just welcome to just get hit consistently. I just enjoy it. It's it's a great activity to get slapped or hit in the face. So, like, we just have Richard, who I think just loves to just slap and hit freaking Andrew, because, like, him just kind of dealing with his wife slowly but surely dying. Uh, and of course, Richard is probably losing the ability to pay for his wife's medication because it's getting more and more expensive. And we have a whole conversation over a phone where Richard is to talk about this medication. So, Andrew is to go on with Matt to this barn party of sorts. And so while they go off to this barn party, they of course end up meeting this girl named Casey, who Casey is to, of course, be like recording. She has a camera also. So I'm like, oh, okay. So, because I've seen this once before, but I'm like, oh, okay, this is how we kind of perfectly, if Andrew doesn't have a camera, then Casey does. And I'm like, this is so, like, because for probably any number of these people, this is probably their first time ever being behind a camera. Plus, they're basically also being their own cameraman, which I guess really, if you go on and you do other movies after this, you can always have that kind of feather in your cap to say, oh, I was technically a cameraman for so and so film, because technically you were. Technically, this footage was to be the cameraman like that. So, yeah, that's kind of interesting how you can kind of have that kind of feather in your cap kind of thing of like, oh, technically I was I was actually the cameraman in this film. So Casey, I guess, is to be a vlogger, and so she's asking why Andrew is just recording things, and Andrew's just like, well, I'm just recording, and she's like, oh, great. So we would immediately think that both Andrew and Casey are just going to be like a couple instantly because they're both just recording stuff. So you would immediately think if she wouldn't have caught something, he would, or vice versa. But like it really easily doesn't happen that way because Casey is to see Matt and be like, ooh, big, tall, strapping man who seems to be happy-go-lucky. Ooh, swoon. So we go to this barn party, and so Andrew goes off on his own because Matt is like, hey man, like go and like drink a beer or just do something, have fun. And Andrew's like, well, I don't drink, but he goes off on his own. And so there's to be one guy who starts to like have a kerfuffle or a kind of argument with Andrew because again we have a moment where some guy is like, hey, you filming my wife? And Andrew's like, no, I'm just filming myself, I'm just filming the party. And so Andrew gets a drink tossed in his way, and so Andrew just goes off and is to be on his own and just be like, God, like, why? Like, I'm sure Andrew right now is just like, God, why can't I just fit in? Like, God, why can't I just, like, why can't I just go into a place and everybody's like, whoa, this guy, whoa. Immediately you would, like, the Red Sea doesn't open up for anybody, and it definitely won't open up for Andrew anytime soon. Even when Andrew is to seem to find some popularity, there is one way or another that always has to just squash that down. To where I can really see the frustration of this person. Plus, also, when we get these people to build up their power more and more and more, like these guys can probably possibly see themselves as a god, and maybe Andrew in this movie starts to actually just see himself as that at some point, which is kind of like little ego driven, but like when really looking at it, like he kind of breaks it down in a interesting way. So Andrew is off, I guess, where all these cars are to be parked. And so Steve, who is to be played by Michael B. Jordan, which is kind of hilarious because I just recently saw Michael B. Jordan in a recent film. I think I've seen him in other things. But I think the most recent thing that I've seen him in is like the Space Jam Legacy movie, where he's like, oh, like Michael Jordan, he's coming down the stretch, and then all of a sudden you find out it's Michael B. Jordan. It's like, oh, boo. So Steve is to go and find Andrew and just be like, hey man, you have a camera? Like, all right, like, if anything, I think we really need like a camera guy right now because I want to take you to this spot where me and Matt found this little this I guess this meteor thing that crashed through this part of this ground. And later on, when Andrew is to make it back to that same spot, weirdly that whole thing had been covered up after they had, I guess, gotten their superpowers. Maybe any number of them had gone on to try and cover that up so that way no one else would go and get these powers. And that might have been an interesting thing to see why is it that that hole is now covered up weirdly. So Steve, Matt, Andrew are to see this hole and they decide to go and climb down it. And so now we have this like kind of really glowing I guess meteor possibly. And so these guys are touching it and they're just going and feeling this thing, and so all of a sudden the camera goes dark. The next thing that we see is each one of these characters has a power of sorts. The first thing that they are to do is to really just start testing this power, and we continue to push this this power because at first they start taking this baseball and they try and figure out how to hit somebody in the face without them knowing it. Like basically for them to not be able to easily see that they're going to get hit right in the face. And so like we have this kind of fun game that they do. And so Steve goes and smacks Matt right in the face. And then so Steve is telling Matt, it's like, well, you're not going to do that to me. You're not going to hit me in the face. And so all of a sudden, Matt comes up with this weird, goofy, like, way of the ball kind of curving around and smacking and hitting Steve. And just, like, having him just get caught off guard. And he's like, whoa, like, you did something really goofy there. You did something really interesting there. So all of a sudden, Andrew is up. And so Matt goes and is trying to hit Andrew, but Andrew stops it dead right before he ends up getting hit. And they're like, whoa, like, that's amazing. So we start to have them try as much as possible to figure out how to best use these powers, but it seems like Andrew is just so much better at this than either Matt or Steve are. But like we have these guys coming up with things to try and do to test these powers, but we start to have them all eventually get nosebleeds because they're kind of flexing their power. And so they say how this is like a muscle, And if they stretch it too far, it'll start to bleed. Like, of course, they're bleeding through their nose. So I thought that that was so, like, yeah, because you're technically using your brain to have this ability. And so they're like, well, hey, like, what should we do now? Like, what should we do with this, like, power? And they decided, it's like, well, hey, we're going to just start effing with people because we have nothing else better to do. So, like, we have them just go to these random places and just start messing with people. Like, we have a spot, like basically we start to get into these like random spots of things, and so we have Andrew going on and uh, or we have Andrew at Matt and Steve. So Steve is to go and realize that he can move this car in this parking lot, and so a woman is to park her car in a certain spot, and then so Steve is to move the car, and so they wait until this person comes back, and then she's like, where's my car?" She ends up going back to the right car, and so Steve is to mention the video. It's like, yeah, this time the black man did do it. Everybody's like, ha ha, and they're all laughing. So, uh, so they go into this store, and one girl is to be just kind of just there. And so they use this teddy bear, and they have it coming flying at this girl, and she is terrified, and she runs off. Like, hey, stay in school, kid! Just playing around with her. Matt wants to try and get some thing of bubble gum to come out of this guy's mouth, but instead, like, he can't accurately get the bubble gum out of the guy's mouth. He takes this guy's body and just kind of pushes him forward, and then Matt's like, oh, like, let's get out of here, let's run out of here. They're like, why are we running? They won't even know it's us. We also had the one moment where they decide to go and take this cart, and they tried to like have this woman chase around the store with this cart, and I thought that that was hilarious. uh, so that's when Andrew, like, after that, we start to have Andrew realize that he can start to use his camera and start to be able to kind of float it around him. That he can just kind of have his camera at one point, just staying at one point, and then he just kind of drops his hands, and then he can just let it float around him. And so, like, that's how he consistently just, like, is to control the camera. So all of this is to eventually build and build and build. And so Steve is spending so much time with these two guys. They spend every day together because they're all like connected, and like you might as well just kind of see what they're going to do next. Hence why he is so addicted to spending so much time with them. So much so that his girlfriend is to call him and say, like, hey, like, why are you spending so much time with your friends? Like, this is ridiculous. And so Steve is just like, yeah. Like, if anything, we have consistently some moments between Andrew and Steve where, like, Andrew and Steve are to be, like, alone together, and it seems that at some point Andrew is to confess things to Steve and vice versa, which is kind of really interesting to help us just be, like, make us feel so bad with the way that this story eventually plays out. But again, it's a lot of honesty, though. And so Steve is to drive Andrew in one part of this film. And so Steve is to mention how he thinks that his mom is cheating on his dad. And then Steve tells Andrew, it's like, well, hey, make sure, like, don't tell anybody about that. And Andrew's like, well, of course I wouldn't. I wouldn't tell anybody about that. He's like, okay, great, good. Trust is being built with these characters. And so later on, we have them both uh, kind of just in the city because why not? They can just go anywhere. But we'll get to that. We'll get to why they can go anywhere. And so it's kind of like a Jumper kind of movie also. It kind of has that feel of like the Jumper kind of film where a guy can literally just go anywhere now. So uh, Steve and Andrew, like we have the conversation that continues where Steve is to really find out that like yeah, like his mom really probably is cheating on his dad and that maybe they're going to get a divorce soon. So let's a little bit. So Matt, Steve, Andrew are to go on and question like, hey man, what do you think the next thing that we can really do with these powers are? Because we have the one point where Andrew is to go and take these Legos and start to like really stack them up fairly easily. And we have Matt who just has problems trying to attach two Legos together because it seems that out of the three of them, like Andrew has figured out the little details of things where these guys just can't, like they have a rough time trying to get to that point. So we push on, and so we have Steve who is to figure out what they are to do next. And oh wait, let's get to one more part before we get to the big reveal. Because Matt, Steve, Andrew all went to this one diner, and they had done something to this part of the soup to make it look like Mother Teresa or something. And so they asked this waitress, like, hey, like, do you understand what's going on with my soup? And this woman is like, oh my god, adios meals, and she walks off. And so we have one of the other guys goes and pulls away her dish tray so that way as this girl is to go and put dishes onto this little cart thing that she has, the cart rolls away and the girl drops this plate and like, god, we're gonna get her fired. But they're having fun. We get to where Andrew is to go and stick a fork into Matt, and Matt is to block this fork going into his hand. And so they figured it out that they can be able to like block, if they kind of put a force field around something, they can block anything. Like, so we really just have a Keanu Reeves moment where we have Keanu Reeves like, are you saying that I can dodge bullets? We have that kind of moment being played into this film. And then we actually do the Matrix moment at the end of this movie, which is kind of funny. So now let's go to the big enchilada, big reveal thing, whatever. And so the big reveal is that Steve had figured out how they could fly. And so both Matt and Andrew are to go off to this this place where Steve is at. And so Steve is to tell both these guys to look up. And they're like, huh? And then they just see Steve just kind of flying in air, and he's just like, "Hey man, how's it going?" And they're like, "Whoa, like how did you figure that out?" And so Matt is having severe difficulties like getting it going, but he did do this like flip, which is kind of cool. And so Matt is to tell Andrew, it's like, okay, you do it now. You go and you fly. You try to figure it out. And so Andrew goes and lifts his body up, and Matt's like, oh yeah, of course. You just easily figure it out. But Andrew not only takes him, but he also takes like these petals and these rocks with him. So now both of them, both Steve and Andrew are now like flying, and then so Matt is to go on and figure it out, and so now all of them can now fly. Like none of them need to be able to have like a car or anything like that anymore. And so we get these guys to just experiment with flying, and we accidentally have them fly so high that they're wearing these like winter jackets because it's so cold up there. And you would be like, what happens in wintertime? Like you gotta imagine it's gonna be so freaking cold, and they're gonna be like flying uh, up into high altitudes, and like, anyways, so you wonder if they could have like figured out a way to like heat up their body or like change their temperature of their body weirdly. I don't know if you could do that with telekinesis, but I guess you can kind of do any number of things if you can fly. So we have it where they're flying up in the air, and so all of a sudden they're flying so high that there's a plane that comes like out of nowhere. And so all of a sudden Steve is to, of course, be like, he's just kind of going into the air. And so now Andrew is to drop his camera in midair, go and grab Steve, but then Andrew not only goes and grabs Steve, but then goes and comes back for his camera, still in midair, and then I guess eventually just descends and have them fall onto the ground. And so Steve is like, oh my god, you seriously grabbed me and then you went for the camera? And Andrew's like, yeah, like, I guess so. And then Matt goes and freaking falls on the ground, and he's like, oh my god, like, how is it that that all happened? This is crazy. So Andrew is to go home, and so Richard is getting very suspicious of things. Richard is like, hey, like, why is it that you don't have Matt picking you up anymore? Like, where are you going? Like, how are you getting how are you getting to school? And Andrew doesn't really say anything, and Richard's like, I'm on to you. Like, I'm gonna figure you out. And Andrew's like, okay. So we have Andrew spending time with his mother at certain points, having certain kinds of footage. But a lot of times, Andrew's mother is to be like sick and is to be, of course, in bed rest, and she, of course, is like crying in pain. A lot of times, you kind of see her in the background of somewhere. So Andrew is to, of course, uh, have a moment with Steve when they're both going off to the city, and I'm probably all over the place with this one. But it's okay. It's either people could be really interested in this review, or people could probably care less, which is okay either way. Like, I like this film. It's kind of a goofy approach to it, and so both Andrew and Steve, while in the city, and they're talking it out. We have Steve convincing Andrew that why don't we use our powers at this talent show? People will go banana and will actually be popular in our school because of this thing that we'll do. So they go on and they are, of course, to do this talent show, and it's to be this like magic show, because they go and they do this deck of cards, and they go and they drop all the cards because the trick isn't working. And then so Andrew ends up going and picking every single one of the cards up using his power, and they're like, whoa, what is that? What's going on? Like, is this some kind of reverse camera, weird angle, special effects, CGI? What's going on here? What kind of trick is this? Is it card strings? What's going on? And so Andrew is kind of like juggling these rocks, and all of a sudden he just walks off, and all the rocks just drop onto Steve. And so we just have like Andrew just doing all of this like telekinesis magic, balancing on this tightrope and juggling these balls, and so on and so forth. And everybody's like, oh my god, this is crazy. And so both Matt and Casey are recording this. So afterwards, like, everybody's like, oh snap, you guys are amazing. And so they go off to this like after party like thing. And so Matt is to mostly like carry on Andrew's camera, because we have Andrew, who is to find this girl named Monica at this party, and then after that, like, Andrew is to hand off his camera to Matt. And so then Matt is to confess his love to Casey, that he's like, hey man, I've been stalking you for a number of years, and like, hey, can't we just be a couple kind of thing? So now we have now we have Matt giving off this camera to Steve, and then so Steve is like going in, and he's like, yeah, yeah, Andrew, this is your moment. This is your first time, boy. This is your first time, yeah. And so all of a sudden, Steve is to be like just kind of waiting out the door to kind of see what Andrew's first reaction of his first time is. And so all of a sudden, Monica is to come out of this room, I guess, barfed on. And so Steve is to come to the room, and Andrew is to just be so just humiliated and upset. He's to pull his pants back up. And so Steve is like, whoa, like, hey, buddy, like, didn't know what was going on there. I guess maybe he was getting a BJ, and all of a sudden he ends up accidentally, like, barfing onto this girl, which I guess accidents happen. So Andrew's humiliated, and then we get him into school the very next day, and like, people are to really just have him be the butt of the joke now. So it's like, he turned around and he was like, oh man, like, people are actually high-fiving him, treating him well, and they were just, but like, that's the whole thing about 50 minutes of fame. It doesn't always last. So, like, what is to have been like, oh my god, he's treated like an amazing guy, and everybody like, now he's just all of a sudden quickly just right back to being this butt of a joke and being terrorized by people. Again, just humiliated. So, Richard, I guess, is to go through Andrew's room to kind of find answers. And so Richard is to go on and talk to Andrew and say, hey, like, I went through your stuff, like, I went through your camera, and I found some stuff on this camera. And so Andrew's like, yeah, so what did you find? And so Richard is to say, you being a loser. Like, he didn't say, like, him having superpowers. No, like, it's just Andrew being a loser because Richard just has to just push this kid down so far. And so Richard is to say, it's like, well, hey, like, how is it you keep affording all this, like, all these, like, cameras, these really expensive cameras? How can you afford all that? Like, I'm here having to, like, pay for your mother's pills and your schooling. And Andrew's like, how are you paying for my schooling? Like, it's public school, you idiot. And so we just get it to where Richard needs to figure out a way to just really just figure out how to lower Andrew down consistently to the point of now Richard needing to just go and beat up his son because that's all he has really left to do, when Andrew is just starting more and more to just start to give his own father lip. So Andrew just is to have enough. He's had enough. Andrew at one point is to take this spider and to kind of put it up in the air and pull all these legs off and to kill it. And so Richard is to go and try and hurt his son, but then finally Andrew has had enough. And so Andrew goes and picks up his father. And I'm like, man, this is crazy. Because, like, I'm wondering how this was approached. Like, because Andrew just had, like, one hand on him. You would think, like, there would be some kind of string action going on here. Because, man, if Andrew could really have picked up Richard, with how big Richard is, how muscular he is, like, yeah, it's just, like, to see this moment where like Andrew is slamming Richard into this wall and saying, like, I can crush you like a bug. And because we have the one moment where Andrew is to play with his power, and like all three of the guys are in their car, and so this one guy behind them is consistently honking his horn, and he's not even wanting to bother to go around, or he's expecting, I guess, them to kind of put the pedal to the metal. And so Andrew just takes his power and just says, like, well, abracadabra, pushing this guy off the road into this lake somewhere where he almost drowns. And so now all three of these guys rush out to try and save this man before he dies, because it's the morally right thing to do. And so now Matt is to come up with rules with Andrew and with Steve to just say, like, hey, we can't use our power when we're angry. Like, we just kind of stop using our powers in these public areas, because someone's going to find, like, this, like, someone's going to come up with footage of us. Someone's going to, like, figure this out, and it's only just a matter of time. So Matt is coming up with these rules, and Andrew's like, well, like, who died made you king kind of situation, where it's like, why is it that you're coming up with the rules? And Matt's like, well, it's the right thing to do. Like, it's the right, like, we should have these rules set up. So, as Andrew is to, of course, like, go on and, like, be beaten up by his father, and then going off to school where he's basically to be ridiculed and humiliated. He goes off to just fly during some thunderstorm. And so now we have this really heartbreaking part where Andrew and Steve are now flying during a storm. And Steve is telling Andrew, like, hey, we shouldn't be flying up here. It's too dangerous. Like, the weather isn't right for this. Plus, Andrew has a camera. And so that's technically a metal device that you're, like, in lightning. You're, like, really close to some clouds here. Like, so all of a sudden, we have Steve, who is to have supposedly been hit by lightning, but we're also in the back of our minds just saying, well, was Steve hit by lightning just by him being flying up into the spot, or did Andrew control the lightning and hit Steve with this so he would go away, but then going away meant Steve was to die? So, let me actually pause here for a second. All right. So Andrew and Steve were talking, and so Andrew has mentioned to Steve that Andrew wasn't really Steve's friend. And Steve was like, what are you talking about? Like, you and me and Matt spend every day together. We're really good friends. And Andrew's like, well, you're not really good friend. Like, what more do you want? Like, to take care of one another, to kind of like, hey man, like, things are going well. You want to hang out at my house till whenever? So there is this continuous escalation of power being done by these characters. And I hope that I've kind of covered most of the stuff that happens in this film, because I have a feeling not only is everything kind of out of, like, order, but like, maybe I'm missing a big part that I think I got the big bullet point parts of this movie leading up to this point, but if I did, my apologies. So let me know in the comments below what was your favorite part about this movie. If you liked this film or if you hated this film, let me also know that as well. If you probably, at this point now, you've probably seen this film, unless you just want to hear people talk about it regardless. So we now cue up, sadly, Steve's funeral. A bunch of people here, and so both Andrew and Matt are talking, and Matt now wants Andrew to just kind of put down the camera and just have them talk. And then Andrew kind of just takes the camcorder and floats it away for Matt to not be able to do anything with the camera. So they talk it out. Matt has some kind of suspicions about what had happened to Steve. And, like, we just go round and round and round about this, to where Andrew just goes and flies off because he's just sick of having kind of Matt just being this, like, policing of what Andrew is doing. It's like it's to the point where he's, like, almost getting as bad as his father. So I think Andrew is just starting to really see a lot of his father in Matt. So that way, Andrew is to just want to get away from Matt because it seems like this is to just be an escalating thing between the two of them. So, but Andrew more and more is to go to school and have a guy humiliate him and like, hey, who am I, Andrew? Blah. And so then Andrew goes and pulls the teeth out of this guy's face and then goes and is to like showcase like what he had done and showcase these teeth that he found from this guy. And I'm like, wow, like we're really getting dark here. And then Andrew is to go and talk about uh, that he had found out this thing about this apex predator and found out that this like predator is just to be like better than anyone else. And like he starts comparing possibly what he's possibly going to do with a lion going after a gazelle. And I'm like, wow, we're really starting to get this character who's just slowly but surely just start to realize that, like, well, hey, like, since I can do these things, I freaking might as well. And we're getting to some, like, darker parts of this character, really, to just have this guy slowly but surely turn into this villain. So, Andrew is to go off and is to then realize he doesn't have enough money for his mother's medication. I mean, I guess neither does his dad. So Andrew just finally decides that he's like, you know what, I'm done with like having to have this like moral code compass of a thing. Like if I have the power to go and get this money somewhere so that way my mother can be medicated, then that's what I'm going to do. So then Andrew is to go off and is to be and the weird thing of it is that we start to have at points in this film where if Andrew is to hurt or like feels like he needs other people, all of a sudden he is to communicate that through the other two. Hence why Steve was to go off to meet Andrew the night of that storm, because they're telepathically communicating with one another. And every time some other one of these people are in pain, these people are to have a nosebleed and are to hear something that one of these people are in pain, or there's something going on with them where they have to figure out where they are, which is really interesting to have this kind of weird like connection, as if it's like a twin thing, or it's like a just a weird sense of something. So Andrew goes off and is to decide that he's going to go and take Richard's fireman equipment, and then he goes off to these shady characters and is going to go and steal money from them. He uses his power to knock them all out or to hurt them, and then he steals all their money, their wallets, finding out that he still doesn't have enough money for his mother's medication, because Andrew is to go to this doctor, this pharmacist, and the doctor is to just be like, well, hey, I told you this and I told your dad this, that like that you guys got to do something to get this money. Like I'm not gonna just like this isn't charity. I'm not gonna give this out for free. So Andrew just decides really at this point, he's like, well, I've already Like, I've already stolen from these people. I might as well just steal from anywhere. So now Andrew goes to this gas station, which I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't think that you can get a mass amount of money from a gas station. Like, you'd probably just get, like, possibly maybe $100, if that at best. Plus, we really just have a much more credit card like world going on here, so I don't know how Andrew can really think that he can get real legitimate money out of anybody. So Andrew goes and steals from this gas station and then runs off, like push using his push power to knock this gas station attendant off of his feet and then steal from this register and have the money all go and like be put right into his backpack. And then so Andrew runs off. All of a sudden, this convenience store clerk is to go into weirdly his own justice. Where, like, I don't know why this guy is to have this shotgun and try to go after Andrew. It makes no sense here. I'm like, why wouldn't he just call the cops and just be like, hey man, like, it's like you have insurance. Like, I would hope you'd have insurance. So, like, if somebody robs you, like, you'll get that money back. So, but this guy goes off and is to try and, of course, shoot at Andrew. And so Andrew is to use his power to get this shotgun away from this convenience store clerk. All of a sudden, the shotgun goes off and explodes this gas station. Starts a horrific fire, I guess. He has this, he has this shotgun go off right by, I think, these propane tanks. That's what caused this explosion. And so Andrew is to be in this hospital, and so Richard is like, oh, like, my son, he's in this hospital. So while so I'm trying to think where exactly is the moment where Matt is to get that like let's talk about it now so I can cover it, and so I feel like I'm not saying the scene or trying to figure out too much where the scene is. So I think it's the explosion part, but like we'll get to that. So Matt is to again sense Andrew and have a nosebleed. And so he's with his girlfriend, who seems to be topless at the moment. And he's kind of playing around with her camera, and she's like, hey, don't film me. Like, kind of playing around. But then Andrew needs to go off. Matt needs to go off and find Andrew and go on and try and help Andrew through this tough time. Because let's get into it. So Andrew is to be at this hospital with, I guess, some significant burns upon his body. And so Richard is to go into this room and is to tell his son that his mother is dead. Because evidently the one time that Richard had spent going looking for his son, which you would think, because Richard is this horrible dad anyways, that he wouldn't give a about his son. But Richard went out of his way to try to figure out where his son is, instead of being home, realizing that his wife is to be consistently ill, sick, whatever. I think Richard just came home and he probably got really drunk and didn't bother to look after his wife, and she coincidentally died. And so now Richard is blaming Andrew because of his mother's death, which is a horrible thing to do, but Richard is a horrible person. But again, Michael Kelly like does really good performances. Like this guy in a number of projects, like seeing him in like Defendor was kind of really interesting. Seeing him be like a very like sympathetic character to Woody Harrelson's kind of Punisher Esh like character, and like kind of seeing him also in just a number of things to kind of follow with Michael Kelly. Like I've seen him in kind of all kinds of random Esh like things. At some point, I think he was in like a Black Mirror episode and so on and so forth. So Richard is to go on and force Andrew to apologize for his mother dying, because Richard is to blame Andrew for her death. And so I think we're even going to have Richard want to just slap his son, even in his own hospital bed. And I think that's where things have just gone way too effing far at this point. And so then Andrew just blasts his whole room. Just to where everybody's to start to think, oh my god, like, did it, like, was there a bomb go off here? Like, there's such a huge explosion. People are trying to figure it out. News helicopters are coming in, trying to figure out what's going on here. Reporters are like, oh my god, there was an explosion in this room. What happened? And so Matt is to run off to figure out what's going on with Andrew. And so when Matt gets there and Casey is filming this, the first thing that we see is that Andrew is to take his father and is to drop him. And so Matt goes and just flies off, grabs Richard, drops him onto the ground, and so now we have to have this fight out between these two characters. And so we have Matt and Casey who's driving around, and Matt's like, hey, I'm sorry that I didn't tell you I had superpowers. Like, I was going to tell you at some point, but like Matt, I'm sure, was just like, well, like, he wasn't 100% sure if this relationship is really going to work. And like, also, like, this is a really dark secret to just be like, well, is this relationship going to like really work out? I don't know, gee golly. Like, it's the Superman debacle where Superman like has these like will they won't they relationships because he's not sure if he can trust anybody to say like, hey, yeah, I'm an alien from outer space. Ain't that great? Hopefully you won't judge me for whenever I need to just do some alien things, right? Because every once in a while I'll just laser beam some toast and and maybe you'll just be like, what the fuck? So Sam is driving off to figure out where Andrew is. And so now we have like a cluster of things happening here. And here's where this movie gets overly complicated, because now we not only have, like, when we don't have Andrew or Casey with their cameras, now we have to rely heavily on these random cameras somewhere, and these random, like, people with cell phones or camcorders or something around here, which makes this movie interesting. But then also, like, there's kind of like a give and take of it, where it's like, okay, this is kind of just ping-ponging all over the place, or what is the right word? Because ping-pong isn't the correct word. Pinball? Pinball wizard? Yeah, pinball? Yeah, it's kind of cling, 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 all over the place. So we have one spot where Andrew is to toss away this helicopter, and so they're like, oh my god, the helicopter. And so uh, Matt is to have this one police officer who's trying to tell him, like, hey, get out of here. Like, so all of a sudden this police officer is getting thrusted away by Andrew. And then Andrew goes and picks up Matt's car and is to put uh, Matt and Casey's car, I think, on the Space Needle, the building that I think uh, Andrew was to mention, like, hey, like, have you ever been into the Space Needle? And Steve was like, well, isn't that just for like tourists or whatever? Like, come on, like we can think bigger than that. Like, it was really cool where all three of them were thinking that they were gonna just go off and fly to some uh like certain place, like some random place somewhere, and they were thinking about where they could travel to, and they're like, well, are you sure that we should like go off? And like, when really looking at these guys, like if they have like not even money, like really if they just have the means, uh and they have the ability to eat and drink somewhere, because they might have some kind of money somehow, because they have to have $500 worth of money somewhere to buy a camera at some point in this film. So we have these characters. Maybe maybe Andrew just saved up his money, like really just did chores and was to maybe get money somewhere. I don't know. Uh, Maybe any money that he was to have ever gotten from some relative somewhere. Maybe he just like has consistently just saved it away for a rainy day. Hopefully you don't save it for too long, because like if you just let like some bank account just accumulate and there isn't any money coming into it for a certain amount of time, like they just weirdly just like, hey, like we're gonna go and like just take away your bank account, which I thought was like so weird. Find that out, where it's like, hey, if you just have your bank account and you don't do anything with it, if you just keep money in there, well, we want you to just keep either withdrawing or depositing money. Whatever. So now we have this big fight out because Matt is trying to use his power to save Cassie, and so then that forces Andrew and Matt to have this fight. And so Matt doesn't want to do it, but he's forced. So now we start to get to this kind of like Man of Steel kind of fight, where we're just starting to see this random footage of people in these random buildings somewhere. They kind of go through these apartment complexes and smash through these walls or smash through these ceilings, and they just smash through these buildings. And like all that is really just all that kind of cool parts here. Like we have at some point where one guy who is Matt, we have at one point where Andrew goes and chucks a bus at Matt, and that smashes Matt into this building. I'm like, oh my god, this is crazy. This is getting pretty crazy. It's getting a little nuts. So, like, all of this is just happening, and every random person is recording it. So, both Andrew and Matt make it to this one building where Andrew is to go and break all these things of glass, and then he is to grab all these cameras and all these like cell phones and whatever to record this whole moment. And so Matt is desperately trying to tell Andrew to just stop what he's doing. And Andrew is to say, "Well, I'm the apex predator, and like this is what I do now. This is who I am." So we now continue this fight onto this one uh, spot where this is to kind of wrap up this movie and finish it up. And So we have like the police force is all really scared that Andrew's going to use his power to kill any number of people. And so they open fire on Andrew, and he basically stops every single one of the bullets, like Magneto style. And then Andrew just pushes all of the police, their cars, everything, just pushes them all away. And then so Andrew is to go on and is to now start breaking buildings. And so Matt is just like, stop, stop what you're doing. Don't force me to have to hurt you. I don't want to hurt you. Uh, because when Matt had gone to Andrew, with the first time that Andrew had done something really wrong, Andrew was to tell him, like, hey, stop what you're doing. Like, remember the rules. Because I don't want to have to, like, stop you. And Andrew is saying, like, to Matt, it's like, stop me. But Matt just flies off. So now we get to this point where Matt is to go on and break off this one statue that has this spear, and so he breaks off the hand of this spear and jabs Andrew through the back of his back, instantly killing him. And so Matt is to now cry because of course, the loss of Andrew, which I think both Andrew and Matt, I think, were like cousins, I believe. So it's like family and extended family. Because Matt is to say that when Andrew is getting like possibly laid or whatever, he's like, "Hey man, like I love you, extended family, and like good for you, man. Like good for you." Like he was kind of concerned about Andrew, but like it seems like everything is kind of working out until like this happens. So Matt decides to go and fly off because he's like, well, like now everybody knows who I am, and now I'm the only one left, so I'm gonna get the heck out of here before anybody tries to experiment on me or ask me a billion questions or whatever. So at the end of this movie, we just have Matt deciding to go and I guess for the rest of his life just backpacking. And so Matt makes it to the one spot where Andrew was to say that he wanted to go. And so Matt is now there to have Andrew's camera to say, like, hey, Andrew, we did it. Like, we did it. And, like, now, like, you can rest knowing that you, like, accomplished this. That you're here now, because technically his camera's here. So, Andrew is to go off and then fly off, and then, like, that's really just the end of this film. So with that said, I think I've covered this movie. I know that this movie is like an hour and 20 and I almost took about that time, so I apologize, but otherwise, hey, like people can watch this however long that they want to. They can watch the whole thing or they can watch like maybe a start of it and then just leave off at that point. But I always worry about how long these things are, but then I'm like, you know what? Like I'm just going to talk, see where it goes. So, speaking of goes, I'm gonna goes my way out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.